Okay, my name is Adam. I'm an alcoholic. I want to thank the group for inviting me. Everyone can hear me. I just really quickly, when I got out of my 28th residential treatment center, I got involved with a group of people that had a very, very close lineage to Dr. Bob and Bill. My sponsor was Dan Sherman, who was sponsored by Joe Hawk, Don Pritz, Gary Brown, Paul Martin, Paul Stanley, and Dr. Bob. It's a very short lineage. And, they took me through the book. They took me through the book right away, and they helped me to understand not just what was wrong with me as an alcoholic, the greater problem that when I stop drinking, the outsides get better, but the insides get worse. But they really showed me how to take other people through the book and to use the book as a tool to help people to diagnose what the problem was, what the solution was, and further to help them to use the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous as a basic text to work with new people. And I never really understood the freedom that would bring. I don't know if everybody knows the history with the Oxford group, but Ralph's going to talk a little bit about the history. Our intention with this, with everybody here, is just to kind of enhance and develop our understanding of the Big Book, how to use it as a working tool to work with new people. Maybe to sit down with a newcomer, read him the doctor's opinion, explain Bill's story, go through there is a solution. Quite often we turn the statements into questions and direct them at the people we're working with. There's many different methods of using the book. One method is to take 4 highlighters, 4 different colors, and go prayers, promises, warnings, and directions, and really looking at that and seeing all the way through the book that this thing is constructed with a lot of integrity. With the problem, the solution, the problem, the solution, all the way through the book, the allergy, the obsession, the spiritual malady or the malfunction of the will, and to really develop a way to have an amazing life and be sober, to be able to navigate around the drama. So we really do have a mission statement here. We have an intention of being helpful. There will be a segment at the end where people can ask questions. I highly suggest you have a highlighter, a pen, and we'll try to slow down. But if we go too fast, all of these will be available online at the designated site that Rodney has, and then you can go back and listen to it. So we're going to go through each piece, and we're going to maybe explain how we've used that with new people. And hopefully we'll keep this fun and we'll keep it interesting, because there's some dry sections of the book, but all of it has meaning. Every piece of the Big Book was specifically intended to enhance and bring out a person's ability to see what's wrong with them as far as alcoholism, the spiritual malady, the self-centered fear, and so forth. So I'm going to let Ralph take it away. He's going to talk a little bit about our history. We're going to talk about the circle and triangle. We're going to do some of the forwards. I doubt we'll get to the doctor's opinion today, but we'll split each chapter up into maybe 2 to 3 weeks, and we're going to go all the way through, and then we'll help everyone with inventory and working with others. So that's kind of just a short synopsis of what our intention is. And if anybody has suggestions or things that they want to write in the chat box, we will review that and see if we can organically kind of move this thing in a direction that'll be helpful to everybody. So if there are specific questions, we will try to, adjust that as we go along so that everybody can get something out of this. I've been doing it. I'm 22 years sober. I'm working with people all the time. And not out of virtue. A lot of it's out of circumstance, but the more that I do it, the freer I seem to get, and hopefully more effective at helping new people. So if you're new, this is a lifelong process that will really, really help you to find joy in your life and purpose. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. I want to hear from Ralph.
Hi guys, I'm Ralph. I'm an alcoholic. Could you give me the thumbs up that you could hear me okay? Okay, great. My sobriety date is March 17, 2001, St. Patty's Day. I've been very, very fortunate. I'm a one white chipper, and I give that credit to the people at the room that I was at called the Pompano Beach Group. They were all a bunch of big book dumpers. When I had about 6 months.
He just froze.
Yeah, frozen for sure.
Could you hear me?
You're back.
Okay. I don't know what happened. It said my internet is unstable. I have great internet here, and this is happening. Anyway, so I dove into the work, and my life has not been the same since. And I believe a byproduct of trusting God and cleaning house is an overwhelming desire to talk about this book and to want to pass it on and to sit down and go over with people. You know, a lot of people come into the program and they say, oh, it doesn't work. And when you get down to talking to them, well, did you try the steps? Well, kind of. Did you have a home group? Well, I went to this meeting, you know, and we're going to talk about that now, the circle and the triangle, which makes me whole. You know, if you look at the first page of the book, it gives the first promise. It says the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. You know, and that's a promise. That's the first promise of the book. And Adam wanted to talk to me about how this came. You know, in the second edition, and what it talks about Dr. Bob having, you know, he knew the Bible chapter and verse, and he was a member of the Oxford group, and they had a program of action, but he could not stay sober until he had the solution, which was found with Dr. Soakworth, you know, and then we had the spiritual solution, which came from Dr. Carl Jung. So I think it's important that
He's frozen again.
Can you guys hear me?
We can now. We'll work out our technical difficulties next week, but keep going.
Okay. Why don't you take it from here? Because I keep freezing on my internet.
Well, I wanted to just give a brief history. There was a guy named Frank Bookman in the early part of the last century who worked for an orphanage, and he had, because of the administration in that orphanage, he got this huge resentment, and he ended up in Keswick, England, the UK, and he learned from someone there, because he was overwhelmed with one of those resentments, the resentment where you go to sleep thinking about it, you wake up thinking about it, you go to sleep thinking about it, and he learned to write inventory. Later, Buckman ends up in Beijing, China, and he meets a gentleman by the name of Sam Shoemaker. Those two together ended up forming a group called Moral Rearmament, or the Oxford Group, which eventually helped the heir to the Firestone tire fortune get sober. And that they had a huge party for the Oxford Group in Akron, Ohio. And that's how Dr. Bob was introduced to the Oxford Group. At the same time, and we all know that Carl Jung had talked to Roland Hazard. Roland Hazard had gone to Carl Jung. He was a kind of a blue blood trust fund kid. And we all know the story. Carl Jung said, "You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I've never, ever seen one single case recover." But he describes in that meeting with Roland Hazard part of what a spiritual experience is. He says ideas, attitudes, and emotions that are the guiding force of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and a whole new set of conceptions begins to dominate. And Hazard brings that back and helps Ebby get sober. Ebby brings that to Bill. And if you look at those two sides, if any of those events didn't happen, we wouldn't be on this Zoom meeting right now. And it became really apparent to me to understand a little bit of the history and what these ideas were, because from the Oxford Group, these steps were formulated: surrender, catharsis, restitution, and service. Ralph's going to talk a little bit about the triangle, but on that first page, if you open it to where it says Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered. Typically when I'm working with new people, and we're going to get to the business right away, I have them write a circle and a triangle right there. If you don't have it in your book, you might want to just jot that down right now. And recovery, unity, and service, from my experience, is really governed by 36 principles. Mind, body, and spirit. We look at it as a holistic approach to recovery, because just like the disease affects the mind, body, and spirit, the steps recover the mind, the body through the fellowship, and the spirit through service. They really also translate into 3 verbs: contribute, belong, and learn. And my experience is, like service, My spirit is blind. But the more I contribute, what happens is the more I start to feel needed. And that has a lot to do with having a home group and having commitments. It also means taking people through the steps. The body, which is the fellowship, is meetings. And am I dedicated and committed to a home group? But each of these three sides is also governed by 12 principles. So if you look at the fellowship, it's governed by the 12 traditions. The traditions stop me from committing homicide. If you really look at it, the steps stop me from committing suicide. The traditions stop me from committing homicide. If you don't believe it, get involved in a business meeting. But there's 12 fundamental principles that govern the way that we interact with each other in the fellowship. And if you apply those to relationships or to a company, you will see that they're almost like corporate charters. They are the glue that keep the fellowship together. The world concepts have to do with the way that we interact with public information in the world. It's very important to understand that there is a purpose and a meaning behind all of these. So the steps bring me wisdom. The fellowship where two or more are gathered bring me a type of power, and service shows me eventually how to bilaterally give and receive love. It's a very, very simple idea. So when I work with new people, that's the first thing I do is have them write the circle and the triangle in their book, and I walk them through those fundamental ideas so they understand where the world concepts come from, where the 12 traditions come from, and where the steps come from. And we can go much more into detail. I can answer other questions about this. A lot of you guys already know this, but until I started working with new people, I didn't really understand how powerful the impact and the transformation was of really having purpose, of watching another human being suddenly make that turn from self-centeredness to other-centeredness, to service-centeredness, to God-centeredness, mind, body, and spirit. And through that, we recover. And that's the first promise, how we have recovered. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to get back to Ralph. Ralph, are you with us now?
I'm here, but I mean, you pretty much covered that. You want me to go into more detail? I mean,
you're welcome, and we can jump right into the first.
Let's jump right in.
Table of contents.
Okay, so when you turn the page, we got the table of contents and from the forward to the first edition through the forward to the fourth edition, including the preface. We just put that down as general information. We got Bill's story and the doctor's opinion in Bill's story is step one, which is covering the physical part of this disease. There is a solution to more about alcoholism, also covers the mental aspect. And we got We Agnostics, which covers step two and unmanageabilities of the second part of step one. And in how it works, we got 3 and 4, into action 5 through 11. Working with others is the first part of step 12. And to the wives, to the family after, to the employers, covers practicing these principles in all our affairs. And the way it's broken down, it actually kind of works backwards because it talks about the body in the first part in the opinion. And this is the first time that, we found a written word where a doctor or somebody had noticed that the bodies of alcoholic are quite different than everyone else. We actually have some sort of allergy. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, we can't do anything about the allergy at all. But it's important to know, do you suffer from this allergy? Does this happen when you start to drink? And then from there, it talks about the mind from 23 to 43, because we do the most insane thing, sober. If there's 86 people in this meeting, the most insane thing a person could do if you're an alcoholic is pick up that first drink. We believe we're under the delusion and we take action based on the lie. Okay, Adam?
Yeah, again, repeating what Ralph just said, if you want to go back later and review this, what I do with the table of contents is everything that Ralph just said. So next to Bill's story, and I'm not going to go through all of it again, I write the craving. There is a solution, the mental obsession, more about alcoholism, the unmanageability. So you might want to write that into your big book. And then when you're working with a new person, have them write that information. So when they're working with a new person, they'll know where that information is. None of this is exact. Even with the doctor's opinion, you're going to see the spiritual malady. You're going to see what the psychic changes. But the majority of information, if you circle the phenomenon of craving, it comes up like 5 or 6 times. So for the most part, you're going to see the craving with the doctor's opinion. You're going to see the craving in Bill's story and the obsession and so forth. So I have them do that. We're going to start with the first preface on page XI. And this is the third edition of the book. I have a fourth edition here. Okay. So we're going to read out of the fourth edition. It says, the first edition appeared in April 1939, and the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The second edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,500 copies. The third edition, which came off the press in 1976, achieved a circulation of approximately 19,500,000 in all formats. But what I have people do when they get to this piece, the next piece, because it's become the basic text of our society, I have them highlight that. It's not a workbook. It's not a novel. It is like a textbook. So it's going to give me specific instructions going through the book on how to recover, what the problem is, what the solution is. It says it's the basic text of our society. It has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery. There exists a strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. There's a lot of people that have wanted to change the language in the big book, especially because things like gender bias, which we all understand, but they didn't want any radical changes in the big book. Therefore, this portion of volume describing the AA program has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the second, third, and fourth editions. The section called The Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact, just as it was originally written in 1939. The Doctor's Opinion used to be page 1, just as a FYI. And because he wasn't an alcoholic and for other reasons, they moved that into one of the forewords. Duncan Silkworth, by the way, was a double board certified physician. We're going to talk about his credentials and credibility. He was certified as a neurologist and a psychiatrist. And that piece of work in the Doctor's Opinion, you're going to hear all the way through the big book. And whenever we see a reference to that, we'll go back and talk about where that is in the Doctor's Opinion. Do you have anything to add on that, Ralph?
Nope.
Okay. So shall we skip to the next forward, or do you want me to read all of that? I think
the bottom of XII.
Okay, why don't you take that? Because I also do that with people where I turn all the statements into questions, and this piece really justifies that method.
Okay. Starting on the last paragraph, all changes made over the years in the big book, AA's found nickname of this volume, have had the same purpose, to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately and thereby reach more alcoholics. These are the questions. If you have a drinking problem, you could put a question mark next to that and ask yourself, do I have a drinking problem? We hope that you may pause in reading one of these 42 personal stories and think, yes, this happened to me, or more important, yes, I felt like that, or most important, yes, I believe this program for work for me too. Okay. So we do that to use that as a tool, because now we're going to be using the book and Bill's story, the Doctor's Opinion, to qualify you, just to make sure that you belong here, to see if you have some of these inconsistencies in your life, to see what happens when you start drinking, to see what happens when you have everything in the world to not to drink and why you drink. Are you thinking that way you just change your mind, or maybe you don't have a choice? All right, continuing from the forward to the first edition. Another promise. It says, this is the forward as it appeared in the first printing of the first edition in 1939. It says, we, very important word, of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely, we circle that word precisely, how we recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary, that no further drinking, no further explanation will be necessary. We think this account of our experience will help everyone to understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages after all. So that our way of living, we circle, we highlight that whole paragraph, and we turn some of those statements into questions. Do I believe that this book will help me? And it goes on to say precisely, and Adam could talk about precise directions here, because, and the word recovered. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah. It's so funny, Ralph, because I feel like somehow we're connected to the same lineage, because these points, when I go through this with a new guy, that there's a thing called the Socratic Method, and the Socratic Method is used in law. It turns all the statements into questions. And not to jump forward, but even like the doctor's opinion, do I drink because I like the effect produced by alcohol? Am I restless, irritable, and discontent by nature? Is my greatest obsession that somehow someday I will control and enjoy my drinking? What I was asked to do is to really look at these questions on that preface where it says, yes, I believe this program will work for me. All those really show me, do I have this experience? Yeah, yes, that happened to me. That do I have an experience with what they're talking about in the book? Yes, I felt that. Do I share these feelings? And the third piece is, do I have faith that this program can work for me? So going through that, I use those three questions, working with a newcomer all the way through the book. Every time I get to some place in the book, even with Bill's story, for example, and we're going to get there, and I'm going to reiterate this. I take stock market, World War I, gender, golf out of Bill's story, and I ask these four questions. Because if I don't have the questions coming into this body of work, I'm never going to get the answers. So did I drink like Bill? Did I think like Bill? Did I feel like Bill? Was I as hopeless as Bill? When I look at Bill's story that way, I really start to see that I have a relationship with these ideas. If you look at Fred's story and Jim's story in more about alcoholism, it's the same thing. Did I drink like Fred? Did I think like Fred? Did I feel like Fred? Was I as hopeless as him? Because one of them's an accountant and one of them owns a car dealer. But if I take those specifics out of the story and I look at the symptoms of alcoholism, all of a sudden I start to discover that I am uniquely related to people in Alcoholics Anonymous in such an amazing way. If you feel like a black sheep in your family, welcome to the herd of black sheep. I guarantee if you're one of us, as we go through this, you will discover and know yourself in a way that I never thought was possible. And they hooked me with that. They hooked me with these ideas because as I went through this process, I started to discover that when I'm sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, if I think, did I drink like these people? Did I think like them? You know, we all laugh at the same like absurd jokes in AA. Did I feel like these people? Was I as hopeless as these people? Then suddenly all the differences from Yale to jail, Park Avenue to Park Bench kind of evaporate. And I see that we are truly connected with that word that Ralph just said, we. And what you'll discover as you go through this process, if you're new, that the underlying undercurrent of all of this is, yeah, me too. I felt like that too. Yeah, that happened to me. I relate to that. And if I go to a therapist and I tell him all this stuff, he goes, well, how does that make you feel? And I come to someone in AA and I share it and they're like, you did that too? It's like, just like we share this thing. We share a common peril and a common solution. So that next page where it says in the beginning, forward to the first edition, if you're new, again, do I see that I have a hopeless state of mind and body? And I'm going to see more of that in the doctor's opinion. It's going to be really reinforced when I go through the doctor's opinion, what it means to have a hopeless state of mind and body. It means I can't process alcohol and I can't process reality. I have a mind that when I'm not drinking, I'm thinking about it. It's very important that I understand when it says precisely how we have recovered. If you're new, by the way, I don't believe if you ask a craftsman about the definition precisely, he'll tell you there's not a lot of latitude for opinion in the word precisely. They're saying this is exactly what we did. And believe me, I went through treatment 28 times. I had the best therapist, the best psychiatrist, the best people in the industry treating me, and I couldn't make it past a liquor store. And I got around a couple of drunks. It took me through the book the way that we're going to go through it over the next several months. And it brought about a change so powerful in my perception of reality that somehow I could never go back to that old way of life. And if you're new, I hope that you might be open to that. So when it says our way of living, that's another thing I highlight here, has its advantages for all. You're going to see that with Al-Anon, overeaters, gamblers, sex and love addicts, that this spiritual malady, which is behind the alcohol, is really a common thread in the human condition. And that's why he said we feel that this way of life, our way of living, has its benefits for all. It's magnificent what happens through these fundamental ideas, which came from the Oxford group: surrender, catharsis, restitution, and service. It's almost like these are spiritual laws that govern man. And when I started to do these simple things, part of the word spiritual is ritual. So I'm going to let Ralph continue. Keep going.
On the bottom of the page, it says, very earnestly we ask the press also to observe the request, for otherwise you should be greatly handicapped. They're talking about the being anonymous. And it's funny because when they thought about the anonymous, when they were talking about this type of it, they thought that they would have been bombarded with people trying to come in to get help. And we know now that it's a different type of being anonymous. Going to the top of the page, it says we are not an organization in the conventional sense or of the word. There are no fees or dues for whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not ally with any particular faith, sect, denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to help those who are afflicted. That's all highlighted, and it's something it says the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. That was actually the preamble. They dropped that in 1958 for any of you history buffs. And, you hear a lot of people say, well, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. That is true for membership, but that, my friends, is not the only requirement if you want to stay stopped and if you want to have a spiritual experience. Go ahead, Adam.
100%, I agree with that. And that one of those requirements is on page 25, which we're not going to get to now. But when I was told the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, it means they'll let anybody into AA. And we all know that. But in order to actually stay here, there were some other requirements, and we're going to talk about each of those requirements as we go through the book. Part of them is that self-centeredness has to be, I have to move away from that. So if you want, I would jump into the next page on the forward. Where would you like to go from here as we go forward?
The top of the page just talks about the growth of the fellowship. If you get down to the bottom of the next, where the paragraph starts, it says the spark that flared into the first AA group was struck in Akron, Ohio in June of 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. There we meet Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson had gotten sober on December 11th, 1934, and he had been trying to help people through that whole time until he went to Akron on a business deal. The deal fell apart, and he didn't go to call his sponsor. He didn't. What he did is he was in a hallway in the hotel lobby, pacing, looking at a drink, and he made 10 phone calls, and he finally got in touch with someone that put them in touch with the eventually Ann Smith, and that's where they've ended up meeting. And I have no idea why I can't talk right now, but it's important to know that during that time, Bill was starting to get frustrated. And he said to Lois, look, this isn't working. Nobody's staying sober. And she said, well, Bill, you're staying sober. And, that is the crux of our thing, is helping people. And I just want to say this again, and I'll say it a lot, is the byproduct of going through this work and having a spiritual awakening is the overwhelming desire to want to help people. And then if you've been sober for a while and you don't have that, maybe you just missed something. Go ahead, Adam. Take it from there.
Yeah, I've personally been to Akron many times. They have a thing called Founders Day there. As we all know, about 10,000 people go to Akron, Ohio every year around June 9th, which is the date that Bill and Bob had that meeting. And you go to the gatehouse, which is part of this big estate there. And it's very interesting to understand what actually happened there. And we know that Bob had been influenced by, as we said before, to reiterate it, the Oxford group. And further down, it says here, almost the end of that first paragraph, it says, though he cannot accept all the tenets of the Oxford group, he was convinced for the need of moral inventory, confession of defects, restitution to those harmed, usefulness to others, and the necessity of belief and dependence upon God. In 1939, just kind of useful information, the Oxford group met at the Hollywood Bowl here in Southern California. Believe it or not, 30,000 people went to that meeting. And you can look that up. If you Google moral rearmament 1939 Hollywood Bowl, 30,000 people went there. And then it's a little religious, but they believed there were four things that blocked a human being from God. And this is what they are. One, a dubious luxury I will not forego. Two, a secret I will not confess. Three, a restitution I will not make. Four, someone I will not forgive. And what they believed is if a person was cleared of those four things, the light of God for those that believe, or the light of the Spirit for those of agnostic temperament, would shine through them and they would be forever changed. And what they called that in 1939 was a conversion experience. But if you look at the luxury I will not forgo, it's like selfishness. The secret I will not confess, dishonesty. The restitution I will not make, fear. Someone I will not forgive, resentment. And later on, when we look at step 4 and we look at the inventory, we look at 10, where we watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. 11, where we do the nightly review and the upon awakening directions. It's very specific that you can see that all of this evolved from these Oxford group ideas. And, my sponsor said to me, Adam, it doesn't matter who's wrong. It doesn't matter who's right. It just matters who's left. And when I started looking at people with 10, 20, 30 years sober that were chasing their dreams, that had great lives, that had managed to overcome this horrific disease, and they were happy, I was directed to ask questions. I became teachable. I became humble enough to continue to do this. And whether you like it or not, my experience is that I'm continuing to do workshops with other people like this one tonight all the time. Every time someone else is facilitating it, I'm there. I want to learn. I want to hear it from somebody else. So if you're new, again, hopefully you might just be open-minded to some of these ideas. Ralph, take it away.
Okay. The next paragraph talks about how Bill was in danger of drinking, and he suddenly realized in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician. Then it goes on to say that the doctor had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. And I think it's important to remember that a lot of times people come into the AA, they're very religious, they can quote the Bible chapter and verse, but they can't stay sober. And Dr. Bob didn't get sober until Bill gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness. And the physician began to pursue a spiritual remedy with the malady of his willingness he had never been able to muster before. He sobered, never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work with another alcoholic was vital. Now, vital is an important word. It means necessary to life, to permanent recovery. So that whole part is highlighted, and we circle vital. If you guys could just jump with me to page 180, the beginning of the second paragraph, it says, talking about Dr. Bob and Bill, the first time they met, because Adam touched on it, what happens in therapy, and this is what happens when one drunk talks to another in the language of the heart. The question might naturally come to your mind would be, what did this man do or say that was different than what others had done or said? It must be remembered that I had a great deal, that I read a great deal and talked to everyone who knew or thought they knew anything about the subject of alcoholism. But this was a man who had experienced many years of frightful drinking, who had most of the same drunkard experience known to man, but who had been cured by the very means of which I've been trying to employ. This was to say, the spiritual approach. He gave me information about the subject of alcoholism, which was undoubtedly helpful. Of more important was the fact that he was the first living human with whom I ever talked to who knew what he was talking about in regards to alcoholism from actual experience. In other words, he talked my language. He knew all the answers, and certainly not because he picked them up in his reading. Adam?
Beautiful. It really is powerful. And that when I work with new people, I have them highlight the top of that forward where it says it also indicated strenuous work. One alcoholic with another was vital to permanent recovery. So it's a powerful word. Permanent recovery is like, I mean, in the therapeutic community, they would never say something like that. And we talk about things like that. And, if you don't believe that Alcoholics Anonymous has evidence-based results, if you're new, go to a world convention. Check out 80,000 of us coming from all over this magnificent planet. And you look at people that have, bought a plane ticket, got a conference ticket, got a rent-a-car, got a hotel, and they've flown from all these different places in the world to celebrate recovery. And you look at every one of those people, and you look at the moms, the dads, the brothers, the sisters, and all these people that have been positively affected by Alcoholics Anonymous, and we can never say AA has no evidence-based results. It is indisputable. So going through this, I'm going to stop there. I typically move out of this section to where we discover the principles. If you want to go forward, Ralph, where do you go from here? I typically go to the next page.
Okay.
With new people.
Do we want to go to XIX, where it talks about the traditions?
Exactly. That's exactly.
Or I want to skip that. Okay. All right. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to involve the principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society, that our leaders might serve but never govern, that each group was to be autonomous and there was to be no professional class of therapy. There were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization, even in our service centers. Our public relations were to be based on attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and film. In no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversy. Now, inside there is all the traditions. I don't know if you want to go over them now, but they're all right there. They're not in order. This is the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 561 of this book. Okay, they were voted at the conference in 1950, and they were confirmed in the first Internet conference held in Cleveland. And when I first got sober, I didn't understand why we needed these traditions or anything. I get, we need the steps, but as I stay sober, the longer I stay sober, the traditions are so important, all of them. Especially like tradition 10, when you think about outside opinions. I mean, the press these days with TMZ and all these other types of news organizations, they can easily stand outside AA meetings and pick people off and do other types of stuff, but they leave us alone because we don't mess with anyone. We have no opinion, whether you're this political factor or this political factor or this sport team or this sport team. We don't care. Just when you come in, we want to help you get better. So I think the traditions, when I was new, I didn't have any interest. Now they keep the groups together. Go ahead, Adam.
If you want to see drama in an alcoholic's life, get between an alcoholic and a drink, right? And my experience with the 12 traditions, if you want to see drama in my life, get between me and Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I start to understand why the traditions were formulated, and this was said in another fellowship, that they protect us from the internal and external forces that could destroy us, it becomes very critical that I understand if one of us doesn't work the steps, one of us dies. If we don't work the 12 traditions, we all die. So the traditions were formulated to protect Alcoholics Anonymous' survival. And just like the steps, 1 through 3 is my relationship with God, 4 through 7 with self, 8 and 9 with others. When I really look at the traditions, it's the group's relationship to the alcoholic who still suffers, the group's relationship to God as he expresses himself in our group's conscience, the group's relationship to other groups in the 4th tradition, and then the group's relationship to the world. So there is a definite repetitive function. And if you're new, later on, we can talk about substituting the group for a relationship. For our common welfare comes first, our relationship or our family or our business or our survival as a race depends on our unity. For our relationship's purpose or our group's purpose or our family's purpose, there's a loving God that expresses himself in our group conscience. Do we have a desire to survive or be together or to thrive as a company or a community? That intimacy is not two people looking at each other. It's two people playing different instruments of the same music. So I start to understand that autonomy allows our groups to have their individuality as long as they're not affecting Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole. It gives us a lot of latitude. And it may not matter to you as a brand new person, but when I start to understand how to apply the concepts of the traditions to a family or to a relationship or to a business, what happens is suddenly I develop bilateral, joyful, healthy relationships. Like when we talk, like Ralph was just talking about outside issues, I can get along with a communist if I talk about food, music, and kids. If I talk about politics, I'm done. So what happens is when I get into relationships with people, if I see those emotional hotspots, just like in a group, I have to learn to circumvent those and to build on what our unity really is. So our unity is the foremost and most important tradition, because together we can survive, but as individuals, a lot of us will die. So that's why when he says principles before personalities, all of these traditions have a function. And the only reason I'm saying this, Ralph, is because I didn't understand the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous until I saw one broken. And when I see one broken in my home group, all of a sudden I lose my mind, because all of a sudden I'm seeing the integrity and the fabric of the thing that's saving my life broken. So suddenly I understand that, like corporate charters, if you're like me and you've had a spiritual awakening, you want to protect Alcoholics Anonymous. You want to see us survive. And anything that hinders or infringes on our growth and our unity is going to be a threat to me as an individual. So if that makes any sense at all, we're getting close to getting through these forwards. And then what we're going to do, if we don't run out of gas here, is we'll start next week with the doctor's opinion. So there's some statistics on the next page. Ralph, do you want to continue?
Sure. Public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds, for there are two principal reasons: the large number of recoveries and reunited homes. These were made impression. The very impressions were everywhere. Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remaining of those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to AA a few meetings, and at first he out of three began to return as time passed. And it goes on to say that AA's wide acceptance of AA was the administration of friends in the medicine, religious, and the press, together with the innumerable others who became or able to persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have only made the slowest progress. Some of these recommendations of AA's early medicine religions will be found further on in this book. It goes on to say we're not a religious organization, and alcohol being of no respecter of persons, or an accurate cross-section of America, and now we can say citizens of the world and distant lands. The same demographics, evening propping, oh my God, is now going on. The personal religion affiliation will include, and it goes on to break those down. That has changed from the first book. All right, and if we want to go on to the third, it talks just more about the updates of on the bottom of the page XXII. It says each day somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing their experience, strength, and hope. It was a very short one that came out in 1976. Then, of course, the last one just covers some literature. And I can remember when this book came out, the fourth edition in November. I had a third edition. It was all marked up perfect, highlighted, underlined. They said a new book came out, and I was so mad because I thought they had changed everything. I was going to have to go through this process again. Little did I know I would probably buy 50 books in 20 years. And it just goes on to cover everything. And again, it reiterates that the basic text hasn't been touched. And then on the bottom of XXIV, it says, in any meeting, anywhere, A, share their experience, strength, and hope with each other in order to stay sober and help other alcoholics. Modem to modem or face to face, A, speak the language of the heart. And I can remember reading that back in 2002, 2003, saying, yeah, that'll never happen. Well, it happened, and I'm so grateful that it happened. But we kind of just brushed over the rest of them because we want to leave some time for some questions. So if you guys have any questions, that's all I got, Adam.
Yeah, I wanted to just mention that my experience after reading about Clarence Snyder and the division of people that got sober in Akron, Ohio, and New York, and in Cleveland, that they would ask some very, very pertinent questions that you don't hear anymore. Like, do you really want to stop drinking? And you'll see it on page 181 of the Big Book. I'm not going to go there again. We went there before, but if you want to do it at your leisure later, they would ask people, do you really want to stop drinking? And that's a black and white question. And the second question was, do you feel like you need our help? And I think we're scared to ask people those questions because we're going to lose people, or maybe they don't really know. But I think it's very important to ask those questions. So when you look at of the alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, my experience, if you're new, if you've been in a home group, if everyone came to our home group state, we'd be in a football field. So what is it that happens when people come to Alcoholics Anonymous and they make these great efforts and they get 30, 60, 90 days, and all of a sudden somehow their life becomes really important. All of a sudden their job, their house, their relationship, and their car take precedence over Alcoholics Anonymous. And my experience with that is when you start to look at these statistics, it's not that Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't work. In Texas, they were doing a study manufacturing chips, and they said that for every 10-year medallion that they had manufactured 10,000 newcomer chips. And that's daunting. And, part of our intention with this is to get people excited about AA, that the understanding of what it means to maintain and develop a spiritual life and to continue to operate in 10, 11, and 12 as kind of a platform to have service, to have a power in my life, to have a purpose. Because otherwise, these statistics aren't what they were in 1935 or 1939 when people first started doing this. I think that's very, very important to talk about that. I read a couple of the questions in the chat. We are going to do a little better job of citing what page and paragraph we're on as we go through this starting next time, because I look at some of the questions. Let's pause now and see if we can answer any questions as we go along. You can do it by chat, or you can do it with Rodney. Okay. Angela from Victoria.
Yeah, hi guys, Angela, alcoholic.
Hi.
Out of interest sake, did they leave a script for us to use to run meetings? I know we all tend to do it on our own. I'm just wondering if there ever was a script that was written for chairing meetings when they began having the meetings.
I have not. I know I've seen a couple from meeting one in Akron, Ohio at King's Church, which I think they have a format there. But again, that fourth tradition allows us to have a lot of latitude. That the fundamental idea is one alcoholic talking to another. As long as it doesn't affect AA as a whole. I know there's certain groups, and I'm not going to mention specifically. We have a very large group here in Los Angeles that has a format, and I think that those formats, by the way, are wonderful. When you look at groups with 400 or 500 people, and you wonder why they've grown to that number, I can guarantee you that if we have a later talk, it's because of the order and the function. Like they'll always read the traditions after the break so they can center the room before the speaker. A lot of times they'll do things like take the coffee like out of the room while the meeting is in progress and then bring it back during the break because they want the meeting to have order. And what we've seen is meetings that follow certain formats seem to grow, and meetings that are unstructured seem to fail. Meetings that find speakers that have had a psychic change and a spiritual awakening, and speakers that are working with new people and sponsoring, seem to do better than meetings where you, and I don't want to offend anybody, but you get a guy with 30 days sober right out of treatment talking for 45 minutes and he's never opened the Big Book. You'll see the old timers run for the hills. Now, that's maybe a judgment, but my experience is that the sole purpose of the AA group is the teaching and practice of the 12 steps. That was written by Bill Wilson. He also wrote that if any member fails to practice the 12 steps to the best of their ability, they sign their own death warrant. And the third piece was in 1942 by Bill, pertinent to your question. He said that our chief responsibility to the newcomer is an adequate presentation of the program of recovery. So those 3 bullet points I have in writing, and I think that that has a lot to do with the format. Hopefully, it kind of redirects us to our primary purpose, which is our 5th tradition. Okay? Thank you. Ralph? Anyone else? You guys could raise your hands on this, and we could do it that way. I think we have just a couple more minutes. Todd, do you want to go? You're muted.
This is Peter. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Peter.
Hey, from the Craven County Group, New Bern, North Carolina. Thank you for doing this workshop. Earlier, you mentioned that the doctor's opinion was on page 1.
Uh-huh.
I missed which release was that on?
I think it was like the 1st edition. I've seen it.
Okay.
I've seen it. I don't know where they pulled that out, or again, I heard it was because he wasn't an alcoholic.
Yeah.
But, we hear a lot of stuff that might not be true in AA, and I don't want to start repeating things that I don't know for sure.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Because when I share my story, I always say my sponsor told me to read the doctor's opinion first, and I always thought it'd be page 1 I'd start on, and but now I'm finding out it was on page 1 at one time. So
that's absolutely correct.
I will definitely investigate that. So.
And another tidbit on that was Dr. Silkworth didn't sign the doctor's opinion in the 1st edition because he knew that our bodies were quite different than a regular non-alcoholic. But he also knew that the spiritual program of action that Bill had brought to him was working, that he saw it. But he says, no. He goes, I know it's true, but leave my name off it. But then later on in the 2nd edition, when it came out, he says, now you could use my name because science had actually backed it up to realize that. So that's another little bit of history for you guys. See another hand.
Hi, Chris, alcoholic.
Hi, Chris. Hello.
Yeah, did Bill write all of these forward to the editions or whatever? Did he write all of these?
He didn't write 3 or 4 because he had already passed.
Okay.
He passed in January of 1971.
Yeah, you can kind of see a difference in, they get a little bit shorter, and the word "we" is not used nearly as much. That's all I got.
Wonderful. Very good. Anyone else? We got about 2 minutes to wrap up. The doctor's opinion is extremely exciting. It really is one of the most powerful pieces in the book to work with new people. I've read that. They say you'll become an expert at the doctor's opinion. I said, what does that mean? And they said, well, you'll read the guy at the doctor's opinion. By the time he gets to Bill's story, he'll have a career. By the time he gets to more about alcoholism or there is a solution, he'll be in love. And by the time he gets to the next chapter, he won't need AA.
Yeah.
So you're going to do a lot of doctor's opinions. So we're going to do our best to use that as a diagnostic tool to help people to see, how serious this is. This is a life or death thing. You might be the only person that a person encounters before they die of alcoholism. This is a big responsibility. Just like if you're new, our responsibility pledge that the hand of AA, when anyone reaches out anywhere, will be there. That is a big part of what we're doing. And Todd, I know you had a question before. You're muted.
Sorry, I didn't realize you had to raise your hand first. I'm jumping the gun a little bit, Adam. I already want to talk about 1, 2, and 3, and maybe I should save that for the next week there and let you guys finish it. But,
I think you were with us last time we did this, right?
Yeah.
I know.
My question is, it's a 4-part question. It's on steps 1, 2, and 3. My sponsor told me that step 1 is on page 23, step 2 on 25, the insanity is on page 30, and step 3 is on page 63. And he asked the simple 3 things in the first 12 hours that he does them. It says, what is the problem? And he goes right to the big book. And he says that the main problem of the alcoholic centers is mind. So you're thinking step one, step two being the solution, God, where do you find God? The Creator has entered our hearts, which is indeed miraculous. Step two. Step three being on page 63. And he told me the insanity is the idea that we can control and enjoy it, not doing the same thing over and over again. And that's how he kind of based it with me. I just wanted to know if you guys agreed or disagreed. I mean,
no, I concur and agree with all of that, but there's a lot more information in the book. And, you know, it's like you could have a significant other. You tell them the same thing every day for 5 years, and then they go out and they come back and they say, you're not going to believe what I heard.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing with AA is Bill has this kind of three-way reasoning where he's going to present the problem a bunch of different ways. And for some person, it might just ring true in a way that's not as simplified as what you're saying. I agree 100% with what you just said. But, you know, then we could just put the whole big book on one pamphlet and be done with it. It doesn't work like that.
Right. Gotcha. Thank you.
And I just want to say before we close that, you know, starting next week and moving forward, the greatest thing about spirituality and the stuff that we're going to be talking about is that you don't have to understand this stuff to try it. You know, just ask yourself these considerations as we're going through them. I ask myself still when I'm going through this stuff, and, you know, just evaluate the results. And if you're like the rest of us, you're going to be amazed before you're halfway through. All right, so we'll see you guys next week. Adam?
Thank you. Want to close with